Alright everyone, funny link in the description there, archived of course, in case they delete it because of, ratioing among other things. From The Hill actually, which is a legacy media tabloid. It's part of the same corporate sputum as CNN and all the others. They accidentally admitted that what's happening in Portland involves riots. And the way they accidentally admitted this is by questioning why the feds that were there didn't have training in riot control. Why would you need training in riot control for peaceful protests? I thought that there was no problem there. Indeed, what's actually happening in Portland, and has been for weeks now, actually like 2 months almost, is that people are throwing rocks, throwing punches, attempting to burn buildings to the ground, smashing and grabbing, looting in stores and so forth. These are riots. They're not protests. They're not connected to police brutality at this point. They're certainly not. They have nothing to do with George Floyd. Initially, in the immediate wake of the death of George Floyd, which literally is just being used as an excuse for what's going on now and has nothing to do with it at this point, the immediate reaction was that we were told by people who were, protesting in the streets, and it was for the first day mostly just protests. We were told that they wanted the officers involved with George Floyd's death charged. They were then a few days later charged. Then they said they wanted the charges increased. The charges were increased. Then they started talking about police brutality in general, and at this point something clicked in every sane mind saying, well, these people, they're just going to go as far as they can, and eventually you won't be able to give them what they want, and so they'll riot. And already they had begun to get rowdy, and the rioting spiraled out of control in multiple cities, especially in states where the governors, where the political complex is reluctant to do anything about it. We've seen this in Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, and so forth. You'll notice the commonality. It's by and large happening in blue states and in far blue urban districts within other states. Because nothing's being done about the riots that are going on, the riots got larger, and in some cases quite violent. You've had, again, children and young mothers killed. You've had all sorts of people shot. You've had all sorts of attempted murders. You've had all sorts of various vandalism, graffiti notwithstanding, as well arson. You've had millions of problems going on at this point, and they keep getting referred to as protests. They've never been protests. In the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's killing, for like a couple of days, there were mainly protests going on. Riots immediately became larger, especially in the news, and after a while, you did get actual protests. Some of them quite cringy, like people, taking a knee in front of a bunch of black people and weeping and begging forgiveness and weird shit like that, as though those people had anything to do with George Floyd, as though that was likely to change the mind of the average American towards anything other than buying another gun and some ammo maybe, which is why you can't fucking find any .22 rounds at the moment that aren't massively overpriced. I think maybe you should, if you've already got some on hand, maybe you should just wait until the price deflates again when people calm back down, after November or something like that. But it's funny because in raising this query, The Hill is accidentally referring to them as riots. Again, there's no reason for riot control if there's no riot going on. Why the hell would you need it? Bunch of people standing around. Supposedly this was a protest of peace. They were just standing there, and all of a sudden the feds attacked them and started hitting them with tear gas and kidnapping them off the street. That's the propaganda that we're hearing from the left. Stuff which is not, by the way, borne out by any available evidence. The legacy media has by and large gone with it. They're not even bothering to do actual journalism in Portland at this point. They're not bothering to tell people the obvious, objective, observable reality. I encourage the people of Portland, you need to start recording when these things go on. Start recording from your apartment window or whatever. Start documenting what's actually going on, and then give the links on social media to people like me so that we can show people objectively these are riots. Because apparently a lot of Americans would rather put their head in the sand, number one, and a bunch of leftists are capitalizing upon the media blackout about what's actually happening, number two. There's a disturbing lack of any attempt to really report what's truly going on in these cases. Therefore, people like me have to pick up the dead weight that's left behind by idiots like the people at the Hill. And then they're so inept they accidentally admit that it's a riot anyway. Well, after weeks and weeks of saying the Portland protesters, protests in Portland, protests against police brutality, BLM protesters, Antifa protesters. They're not protesters, dude. They're throwing rocks and shit, trying to burn buildings to the ground. I'm very glad that the Hill finally, accidentally, of course, admitted that to be the case. That's about all. Peace out.